Hello. This is Derek from One River Tea. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. Alright, so welcome back to the final installment of our three-part tour of the Fuding white tea villages. In this episode, what I want to talk about is the black sheep of the core region. That's Guangyang. And I think I've been saying this wrong. Sometimes I say Guanling, sometimes I say Guangyang. It is actually Guangyang. I live in a city with a Guanling province, so very, very similar. Anyways, so Guangyang, it's a little north and west of the Fuding proper region, kind of on the border between Zhejiang and Fujian, though it is still within the Fuding municipality. And so all of these regions are essentially within 30 to 40 kilometers of each other. In the last two episodes, I talked about my more favorite regions, the Panxi region, the Taimoshan region, and even Bailing. And so we'll start our adventure in Diantou in 2020, in the autumn of 2020, and then travel northwest into the mountainous wilds of this Fuding municipality. Now, in the last episode, I focused a little more on the tea makers in Taimoshan and Bailing rather than the actual region. And so for a more detailed look at the geographic layabout and the history of Taimoshan, give episode 2 a listen. That's where I really get into what it feels like in the Taimoshan area and the history of the Fuding white tea in that area. In this episode, I'll try and stay a little more grounded in the physicality of the Diantou and the Guangyang regions. Now, as I mentioned, Guangyang is located on the northwestern edge of the Fuding jurisdiction. And it's here that not only a majority of Fuding white tea gets made, but also here that we see a relaxing of the normally very stringent government regulations. So whereas Panxi and Bailing and Taimoshan have very strict government control on what can be sold, the pesticides that are used, the fertilizers that are used, the tests that are being given to the teas, we see a lot of that not really taking effect in Guangyang. And one of the reasons for this relaxation of these policies is due to the geographic location of Guangyang. Whereas in Panxi, we would see an elevation of maybe around 500 meters. In Guangyang, a lot of stuff is between 600 and 1,000 meters. And so looking at how this is in the real world, you have a lot of mountains, you have a lot of switchback roads, and a lot of difficult to access tea gardens. And additionally, it sits right on the border of a few different counties, so it's not yet quite to Zhenghe. Zhenghe is kind of bordering the Wuyi county in the far west of Fujian. But Guangyang is right on the edge of Fuding control. And as a result, I kind of barely consider it in the true Fuding production region. And it's in this little bit of lawless territory. There's actually a really great Chinese idiom that comes to mind when I'm thinking about Guangyang, and it's a Tian Gao Huangdi Yuan, which means heaven is high and the emperor is far away. This kind of suggests the idea that when you get into these remote borderlands, into the really remote fastnesses in the wilderness, and you're living kind of in this lawless west kind of area, the police, the government, the Huangdi, the emperor, they're all very far away. The gods have turned their eyes away from you, and you can kind of get by doing whatever you want to do. And so in my opinion, Guangyang kind of has this Wild West vibe. So a lot of the teas that get made up here are a little outside of the guiding policies that kind of define Fuding white tea. Now, in continuing the narrative theme of these episodes, I want to tell the story about how we ended up in these very remote regions with just the farmer and ourselves, especially because we're totally relying on public transport, hired cabs, and the grace of passionate tea makers. And this is one thing I should probably mention a little more. We're not driving ourselves to these tea mountains. We don't have any cars here. We don't have our own transportation. We're relying on, the trains, the high-speed rails, flights, cabs, black cabs. We walk around the villages on foot, and this gives us this kind of on-the-ground feeling where we are intimately connecting with the places we're visiting, with the places we're traveling. And I actually had an instance like this when I was sourcing teas in Zhejiang recently. I tried to cross a mountain on foot, and I eventually ended up with this sheer rocky bluff, atop a sheer rocky bluff with a beautiful view. But there was no way to kind of get across it without, things getting a little more dangerous. So I hiked back down and got onto the dirt road that kind of circumvents the mountain. And I just walked all the way around. It took me maybe 2.5 hours, 3 hours. But there were no cabs in that very remote region. And so, again, that was kind of the only way I could do it. So back to this tale of Fuding, white tea, and sourcing and getting out into this lawless land of Guangyang. Our story all begins in Diantou with Cho, and in the dry leaf wholesale market in Diantou, because it is in the autumn of 2020 that I first make this huge discovery that's totally reshaped my understanding of white tea production, of aged white tea, and all of the stuff that's going on here in Fuding on the ground level. And it's also a discovery that tracks with what we saw happening in Guangyang. So, getting into it, this is an interesting tea trip because it's not just me going solo. This is a great time to introduce the other worker owners of the One River Tea Cooperative, Alex and Xiaoyan. So, if you didn't know, I'm Derek from One River Tea. Hello, hello. We have a tea trading cooperative based in China since 2018. We have a website, onerivertea.com, where we sell all the teas from the people we talk about on this show, well, most of them, and then also teas from people that maybe we haven't talked about. Anyways, the other two worker owners are Alex from Washington State, USA, who's currently getting his master's in economics in the Hubei University here in China, and Xiaoyan, his domestic partner, who is from a small village in Shanxi. Alex does most of the Solidarity Trust type projects, the ones that are dedicated to furthering the economic gains and development of the farms we work with, while Xiaoyan does the lion's share of the accounting, the inventory, the shipping, and the packages. And then there's me, and I obviously do the podcast. I also run the Instagram and take all the photos and do the website design and whatnot. So, together, the three of us create this cooperative called the One River Tea Cooperative. And when we can, we all travel together and do our tea sourcing together, and it's really great. So, this is one of those rare moments where all of us came together and were able to source some white tea together. So again, this takes place in October of 2020 in Fuding, in Diantou. And this is the October holiday. So the Chinese government has this brilliant idea to give all the, 1.4 billion people a week off work. And they can all travel during the same week in October. This is their Independence Week. As a result, things get a little hairy around this time. This is very similar to Spring Festival, the Chinese Lunar New Year, when everyone's traveling all over the place. But this was also a time where we all had the time off and could travel together. And so we decided to meet in Fuding. I wanted to introduce Alex and Xiaoyan to Cho, who I had met the year before, a year and a half ago. However, this wasn't our only mission here, because as I mentioned in episode 3, a big part of tea sourcing is shopping around. It's looking for other connections, maybe somebody who has more interesting or better teas. And so the plan is to hit up the dry leaf wholesale market, get some tea samples, see if we can meet some tea makers from other villages, as well as seeing our buddy Cho. So, as Alex and Xiaoyan and I all get to the wholesale market, this is the first time I'm able to actually see people selling tea here. Because when I went in spring in 2019, it was all empty. And I couldn't find anything there. I didn't go at the right time. But what we're seeing here in autumn of 2020, as opposed to the crazy scene from 2021 in spring where everyone's selling raw leaf, here everyone's selling already made tea. So as I mentioned in episode 3, the wholesale market is more of kind of like basically a warehouse with only 2 walls. It's about the size of a football field, has a big transparent roof over it. And when we went in October of 2020, there were about 4 rows of farmers, all standing in front of, large, open 25-kilogram boxes of different types of tea. And so we get there. It's pretty exciting. We kind of split up and start browsing, sniffing, smelling, talking to the farmers. Usually what we're seeing is they contain 1 or 2 boxes of Oolong Drunk, so the tea that was just harvested last week or a few weeks ago. And then one box contains the Baimudan from spring. This is the white peony. And then a very small box, sometimes even just a bag inside the other bags, is the spring silver needle. And sometimes a farmer has a few more boxes from teas from different years and something like that. And also, even though these are massive 25 kg boxes filled with tea, this is still just the Yangping. This is just the sample. This is the tip of the iceberg. At the wholesale market, I could probably ask any of these people for 100, 200, 300 kilograms of the same tea that's in their box, and they could probably fulfill my order. So we get to browsing, and we found some interesting teas, some tea makers from all the different production villages in Fuding, because, as I mentioned, if you have a small farm in the rural mountains, you need somewhere to sell your tea. So a lot of people bring their tea into Diantou, and they sell it, and then whatever. Like I said, that's just the Yangping. The rest of the tea is in their factory in their village. And so I buy some aged white tea from a guy with a plot in Diantou. This is the first time I've bought anything from the region, so I'm interested to see how it compares. Alex and Xiaoyan make friends with a younger farmer from Guangyang. This is Wu, who we'll talk about later. But after meeting again and kind of discussing what we found, what types of teas are being offered, we come across this one kind of truth. All the Shoumei tea that we see in this market looks aged. It's all brown. And this is very different from the teas that we're getting from Chou or Zhang. Because Chou and Zhang have this very nice, like, clean, green-looking Shoumei. And so we make another round, we start asking why they don't have any green Shoumei. And one very accommodating farmer tells us straight up that he makes it brown because the brown tea sells better. And I'm just totally shocked. I have no idea, like, why the brown tea would sell better than the really beautiful looking, rich, green, fresh Shoumei. So I ask him. And he continues telling me that a lot of wholesalers will buy it from him because it looks old. And he goes as far as to tell me that I can buy this tea right now and I could sell it as 3-year-old Shoumei. and at this moment, I'm probably just totally stunned. I'm staring at him without seeing him. I'm just kind of blinking as in the movie theater of my mind, all the aged, browned, white teas I've ever had in my life are on replay. And I'm wondering how much of this tea was real? How much of this tea was just made to look brown and then sold as aged tea? So I'm kind of losing my shit here. And then after a while, I kind of get back to it. And so I buy a little bit of the tea from him as a sample. And then I beeline it out of the market straight to Chou's shop. And I get there and I put the tea down on the table and I say, "What is this? Chou, what's going on here?" Because I wanted to get this expert opinion. And Chou looks at me and looks at the tea and kind of has this sour expression on his face, like a family secret just got aired. And a relative just said something a little uncouth. And he's like, "Okay, this is not good Shoumei. Everyone can make brown Shoumei, but it doesn't taste good. It's way harder to make good quality green Shoumei. It's way easier to make the brown Shoumei. The brown Shoumei is just improperly produced. There's too much heat, there's too much moisture in the tea leaves, and it sits like this and too long during the sun drying process, and it naturally browns." And so we kind of understand that this is different from oxidization. It's not like they're just wilting the leaves and doing a yao qing and making a pseudo black tea. This is its own failure in the sun drying process of white tea. And so yes, it's technically a white, but he says that this tea will not age well. This tea is not as good as his green Shoumei. Now at this point, he takes out the green Shoumei and we compare them side by side and we drink them. And I have to, as much as I love Chou, I have to be rational about this and think, okay, Chou is obviously selling me his green Shoumei, and so he has to say it's better than this brown stuff. And I drink them, and side by side, and they're night and day. The green Shoumei is grass and vegetation, where the brown Shoumei is all wood and sap. But to be honest, they're both pleasant teas. I like drinking them both. And so I'm kind of letting Chou get away with this one. I'm not arguing too much. I'm thinking okay, Chou, you can say your tea is better, but in my opinion, I don't quite believe in the innate superiority of the green over the brown Shoumei. Until recently. Recently, I actually had an experience that kind of proves Cho's assessment accurate, because Cho says that the brown Shoumei will take on a sour note in time. And now, naturally, the tea I bought in the market in 2020 was freshly made, and so it didn't have any of this sour notes. But this year, in 2023, in the Chinese Lunar New Year, one of my Tea Master friends brought in this really nice, expensive, very mature white tea from Fuding. And all my Tea Master's friends are, teachers and government officials, and I'm sure this tea is very expensive. And so I want to give it a try. And so I try it, and immediately it's sour, dry, and woodsy. And so I'm getting that woody, that sappy taste, but then also this really unpleasant sour note. It feels like I'm just eating like a lemon branch. It's really terrible. And I'm just like, I put on my best face because, in China you have to give people mianzi, give people face, and kind of respect their offerings. You don't want to make people look bad, especially in front of their friends or in front of other people. And so I'm just like looking at these leaves, and it doesn't look good either. It's like 70% of the tea is like brown, like okay, but then 30% is just totally blackened. And so this is just a massive failure in the production at some levels, because I've had a lot of aged white tea, and this is totally different. And it kind of confused me at first, because I was looking at the dry leaves, and the buds especially, because the buds will turn orangish yellow or orangish brown after about 6, 7, 8, 9 years, where you can't naturally brown the buds. You can brown the leaves easy at an early phase, but the buds take a little time. And so the only way to get like a brown bud is to actually have it aged. And so what I'm assuming happened is that this has been a brown Shoumei that has been aged for however many years, and the result is just this terrible tea, because it was made out of a poorly made brown Shoumei from the beginning. So, to bring us back to being in the tea house with Cho, moments after making this realization, I'm trying to just totally reorganize my whole perception of aged white tea. And we'll get into this with later discoveries that there's not a lot of aged white tea past a certain date, say 2010, 2007. And so a lot of what's going on is a lot of people are trying to figure out ways to make aged white tea quickly. We saw the same thing happen with the pu'er boom in the early 2000s. This is right when they discovered how to make cooked pu'er, because pu'er really just got super popular. Everyone was drinking the aged pu'er, and then they formulate this way to make a pseudo-aged pu'er, which we obviously know is not quite the same. It's the cooked pu'er, show pu'er. So my assessment is that they're trying to find ways to do this with white tea, unsuccessfully at the moment, I might add. And what's interesting here is that everyone in the whole chain of production is kind of colluding in this convenient lie. Because, imagine if you're a farmer and you realize, oh, I can make this brown Shoumei and sell it for 2 or 3 times the price of the green Shoumei. And what's different is the brown Shoumei is made by heaping more tea than I would normally do on the drying racks. And this slows down, traps moisture, keeps it hotter. But also, this is kind of like the lazy way to make good Shoumei. And so Cho sees it and he says, this is bad production. This is what happens when you put too much tea on the basket at one time, and you're trying to do it too quickly. You're trying to make too much tea and you're rushing it, and you get this bad quality product called brown Shoumei. How to get green Shoumei is to keep a very thin line of the fresh leaves on the basket that's sun drying, elevated to air so that air can flow through. A lot of farmers don't have time for this, and so they try and find other ways to do it. And the brown Shoumei was an unintended result that farmers are now selling for, a higher price because it looks old. Now, think about the whole chain of production here. It's not just the farmer. It's the farmer, it's the wholesaler, it's the retailer, it's the consumer. Everyone in here is colluding in this convenient lie because at the end of the day, people want to drink. They want to experience aged white tea. And aged white tea might not be available to everyone because, one, you need good connections. You need people that are making this high quality tea, you need the monetary means to afford this high quality aged white tea, and a lot of people don't have it. And so with this Brown Shoumei, a lot of people can drink what they believe to be aged Shoumei. And at any point in this chain, somebody can swallow the bait. Somebody can eat the lie and say, the farmers at the wholesale market, some of them were saying, oh, this is from 2015. And after realizing this truth, I'm like, no, it wasn't. No, it isn't. I know it's not. But it's kind of like a nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of situation at that point, where if you want to play the game, you can play the game. And I can be like, well, the farmer said that it was, from 1990s. And so I assume it's just 1990s tea. I'm not going to question it. I'll pass it off to you, and I'll sell you this 1990s white tea for, $8 an ounce. And which it would be totally impossible if it was really from 1990. And so at any point in this production chain, somebody could just take the lie and say, okay, the farmer said, the wholesaler said, the retailer said, it's from 1990s, and so that's what I'll say it is. I'm not going to question it. I'm not going to look into the details. And this could be from ignorance. It could be from not knowing this whole behind-the-scene racket. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because it kind of brings up an interesting point on, the nature of truth and value. When we're drinking teas, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, when we're drinking teas, we want the experience of drinking fine teas, but we don't always have access to them. And so ultimately, what is the goal of your tea drinking experience? Is it to drink genuine teas from a specific region and a specific year? Or is it to have a meaningful and valuable tea drinking experience? Because these two are not exclusive. You could have a really powerful tea session with a tea you have no idea about. You could have a fantastic tea session and all the information about that tea is wrong. It doesn't matter. And so at the end of the day, what is really your value here? Is it the truth or is it the tea? And so again, this is kind of me playing devil's advocate here, and we're living in this kind of post-truth society where the truth is less important than we really want to believe, because what is truth at the end of the day is our own experiences, these unalienable experiences of our lives that are intrinsic to our own identities and our own perceptions of reality. And this means more than what the farmer said, what the producer said, what year the tea was made in. What really matters is your own experience. And this will be really important when we kind of talk about Pu'er and these regions and the Shifeng Longjing and the Meijiao Oolong and all of these difficult to find teas where a lot of people want the experience of drinking a Laobanjiang, but how many people can actually have access to it versus how many people want to have access to it. And so again, as One River Tea, we're obviously really into truth and transparency, and so it's just interesting to kind of play this devil's advocate where maybe we're wasting our time. Maybe what we're doing is we're, cutting the wings off the butterfly, and instead of letting it flow and fly, we're kind of breaking it down to see how it all works. And this sometimes it's the man behind the curtain, and we're showing everyone, oh, this brown Shoumei is not actually aged Shoumei, when it really, at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't matter. But if you're still curious about the green versus brown Shoumei dichotomy, I suggest checking out the Oolong Drunk's blog post about it. I think it's the inconceivable lie we've all been told is the title of his blog post. And I'll link it in the show notes. But for those who don't know Cody, the Oolong Drunk, he's been blogging about tea for the past 7 years, and he did a little investigative tea article about this discovery we made. He interviews us, he interviews some other people like Bitterleaf, and I think Dylan from the Sweetest Dew. And yeah, we also have a blog post on our site about the discovery as well. But if you're still curious about it, that was a pretty long tangent on it, but it's not necessarily a tangent because what we found in Guangyang is just the Wild West of brown Shoumei. So let's get into it. Back to our destination, to Guangyang. So after realizing all this stuff about green brown Shoumei, the next day we decide to hit up Wu. Wu was one of the farmers that Alex and Xiaoyan met in the Diantou wholesale market, and he was selling a lot of this brown Shoumei. And so we want to kind of follow this lead and see where this brown Shoumei is coming from. And so he agrees to take us up to Guangyang the next day. And here we go, down the mass-produced Brown Shoumei rabbit hole and into the wilds of northwestern Fuding, the mountains of Guangyang. So Wu comes out to Fuding the next day and picks us up early in the morning, and we all eat breakfast together, and you wouldn't guess what we ate. Yep, it's Xiaoyan, that really weird meat dumpling that has a little bit of sweet potato flour mixed into it, but it's really just a bowl of meat nuggets. And I hate this stuff. And I mentioned this in episode 3 when Cho takes me out to eat some Xiaoyan, and Alex loves it, Xiaoyan loves it, Wu loves it, and I'm just looking at my sad bowl of meat nuggets, and I'm thinking, like, is there any type of vegetables I could eat? And there's, some seaweed soup, but is that really a balanced breakfast? Anyways, I'll get over it. And so after this meal of meat nuggets, we get out to Guangyang, and it takes us a really long time. I mean, Cho took me out to the Panxi Gardens, and this is feels way further than that. We're driving maybe like 45 minutes up, up the mountains, up these weird roads, small roads, and Wu is like just speeding through all like the single lane villages that we're passing through, but he seems like he's done it many times before. So a little bit about Wu. He's kind of a young guy. He seems young, he seems healthy, he seems very fit. He's really, really quiet. Like, he barely says any words at all. He's just super reticent. He's kind of got those like cowboy eyes that just kind of look off in the distance when no one's talking to him and he's looking at the clouds. And you ask him a question and he answers, yep, or nope. And so we kind of figuring out how old is this guy, because he seems kind of younger than me. And so eventually we figure out he's a tiger, and that means he's 2 years older than me. And I say, wow, Wu, you look really young. And he says, must have been the coal mining. Coal mines kept me young. And we're like, oh, you were a coal miner? And he's like, yeah, there was no money in white tea here, so I moved up to Shandong and started mining coal for the past 10 years. And then back in, I think, 20, I'm sorry, I'm giving him a Western twang, but that's just the vibe. Back in like 2012, he kind of came back to Guangyang to start growing tea because his auntie told him that all of a sudden there's money in tea now. And so they've had this kind of like village and this tea garden for a long time. But as he was saying, there was no money in making tea. There was no money in making Fuding white tea. There was more money coal mining. Think about this. There was more money in coal mining than there was in tea production. And so just thinking about the amount of change that has happened in the past decade, because he came back in 2012 or 2013, thinking how white tea now is some of the most expensive teas you can buy in China, when 10 years ago it was even better to just move to a northern province and spend your life under a mountain mining coal. And so this is just really, really crazy, and it's really sweet to see this kind of homecoming for people like Wu and people from these rural villages that had no future, that had no opportunities, that had to leave their village, leave their city, leave their province, and find whatever backbreaking job you could find. But I guess if you're a coal miner, at least you stay young. It took me a while to wrap my head around that, but I think he was saying it kept him fit, it kept him strong, and that's why he looks so young. But for me, anyone who spent 10 years mining coal, man, if you look younger than me, then what have I done wrong? So anyways, it was essentially that conversation that made us fall in love with Wu and really want to ally ourselves with the tea that they're making, because it's just the poster child for the way that the Fuding government's new regulations, for the way that the mayor of Fuding in 2010 really changed the name of the game for Fuding white tea and created opportunities across the entire municipality for these people that were essentially living under subsistence farming. And we'll get this later, because Wu takes us to his old house. and it's in the middle of a rice paddy where they're harvesting rice by hand. There are pigs squealing in the distance because they're being castrated. And anyways, I'll get there later. So I know you're eager to hear that part of the story, but so after 45 minutes, what feels like an hour, we get out at the base of a mountain. We drive through this village. Wu doesn't say anything, as is his wont, and he just parks at the mountain. We all get out, and we're still kind of wondering, like, okay, like, is this your tea mountain? Are we just gonna hike the mountain? And yeah, he says we can just walk up here. And he starts doing the thing that all the really wonderful tea makers and people that have been born and raised on these mountains do. As we're hiking through the tea plantation, through these, and this is a really, really beautiful tea plantation. It's terraced gardens with a lot of mixed vegetation, with bamboos, and really, really mountainous. And you can see his village in the distance. We use this photo for a lot of things when we're all here. I think I use it for the YouTube banner and the YouTube background, and maybe even on the website. The website where I'm holding up a leaf, this is in Guangyang, this is in Wu's garden. But he's doing this thing where as we're walking up the mountain, he's picking plants and chewing them and telling us, oh, this is edible, oh, you can put this in stews. And he starts gathering just a handful of plants, and we'll see what he does with this later. But my favorite plant was the Sichuan peppercorn pepper plant. And we didn't eat the peppers. What we did is we ate the leaves. And the leaves were super peppery and mouth-numbing and stuff like that. I believe it was the same one because it had the same mouth-numbing effect as the Sichuan peppers do. Though this is, hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers, maybe 2,000 kilometers away from Sichuan. This is on the coast of Fuding, or coast of China. Anyways, it's cool to see when somebody is this integrated into the land. Now, a few more things. This was in October, mid to late October of 2020. This is, in Shoumei terms, what you have are the three main Shoumei harvests. You have the Bailu harvest, and this is kind of like mid-September, mid to early September sometimes. It's the agricultural calendar, so it fluctuates every year. And then you have the equinox, and these are all 2-week terms. So you have the white dew, which is 2 weeks. And this is 2 weeks before the equinox. And then you have the equinox, which goes on for 2 weeks, which is usually September 22nd or something like that, a few days after my birthday, which is why I remember it. And then you have the Hanlu. Hanlu is essentially where we are now, and this is the end of Shoumei tea production. Shoumei is, the large leaf, very few buds, big leaves, but it's all freshly produced tea. It's all tea grown this season. And so you're picking it, maybe it has one leaf, maybe two, maybe three. And so we get out into these fields. This is the Hanlu time, and the scene is just dotted with one or two tea farmers. And what's great about this is Wu sees every single one of them, and this guy who's like really quiet, doesn't say much, he greets every single one of them, and he shouts across the mountain in the Fangyan, in the local dialect, and they all wave back. And we just make our way up the mountain. And there are moments where we kind of lose the path between the overgrown rows of tea bushes. Usually most of these are pretty well manicured. They're all about thigh high, good for easy picking, and look pretty well cared for. But there are times where we're kind of walking along and we're really shimmying between the leaves. I hear a few branches breaking. I get a little worried. And we have a great video of Xiaoyan just getting totally stuck in the middle of a row where she's just like can't figure out the way out of it, and she doesn't know how she got in it, and it's a pretty good time. But eventually we get over the ridge, and over this ridge we see before us a huge valley, and this valley is just totally yellow with autumn rice. And so when rice becomes ripe, it all turns yellow, and then it's harvested in the kind of like the muck and the mud. And so as we're walking down the main path, we see an old lady just harvesting this rice with sickle, just all by hand. And I've never seen anyone do it all by hand, and it's really amazing. And so I stand there and watch her just slice and set slice and slice and set. And I'm reminded of a scene from Anna Karenina where Levin is harvesting wheat with the peasants, and he talks about just the ebb and flow of work and rest. And for this moment, Levin feels incorporated into this kind of ritual of peasant life that goes beyond him as an aristocrat. And I guess it comes to mind because I'm kind of looking into this pastoral world from the outside and looking at the rhythms of life in it. And I turn around and I see Wu talking with Alex and Xiaoyan by this kind of rundown old house with the roof fallen in. And Wu says, "This was my childhood home." And there's an old guy outside who's, I think he's digging up the trunk of a tree, the root of a tree. And he says he's his uncle, and I can't understand anything they talk to each other because this is all the local dialect. But it's just really interesting to see, like, this is the world that he was living in before tea came. This is the world where he left to go coal mining. And really just to see somebody harvesting rice by hand really shows you how isolated, how rural, how totally like self-sufficient this area is. And self-sufficiency, we'll get into this later in the podcast. In China, it's not necessarily a good thing at the moment. You have a lot of minority groups, you have a lot of small communities and villages that are living this self-sufficient subsistence lifestyle. What this does is, while you can make do with most of your means, you can get most of your means by just growing and keeping livestock, growing crops, but you don't have any opportunities. You don't have any way to engage in the modern world. And so there are some pockets of China that are kind of left outside of time. We talked about Hefeng County out in Hubei. And that's an area that's so isolated. People were just getting by themselves for so long. But everyone's kind of doomed to this kind of cyclical nature of life and death within the village, within the mountain range. And so it's really interesting to see tea coming to these really obscure rural regions like it did to Fuding, and suddenly opportunities come with it. And so, again, this is just really exciting to see. And so after we leave Wu's old rundown house, we're going back to the village. And Wu meets this old girl he knows from childhood, and she's in an apron, gloves on, and standing in front of this big, I think it's like a stock house, like where a lot of pigs are, and we can hear the pigs screaming. We've been hearing the pigs, I forgot to mention this, we've been hearing the screams of pigs just bouncing off the mountain walls of this kind of valley. And I assume it's slaughter day. I assume they're just killing the pigs. But apparently what they're doing is they're castrating them, which supposedly is a pretty common practice if you're raising pigs, because if the pigs are not castrated, male pigs have this thing called boar taint, which kind of changes the flavor of the meat. And so castrating is usually viewed as a way to make a better meat from the pigs. Anyways, totally bizarre and a weird look into this pastoral life where everything seems really peaceful, but then there are other elements about this of, you know, what these people are doing to kind of make money, and what are they doing? They're raising pigs, they're killing pigs and making a lot of meat, and they're making a lot of rice. And so now, after that tangent, we're going to get down into the village and talk about what tea they're making as well. So Wu takes us down into the tea village, and I immediately see they have a whole lot of tea. Even though it's so late in the season and there are only a few pickers, there's a lot of fresh tea kind of heaped up on the drying racks. And I can immediately tell there's not enough space here. You know, there's too much tea, there's not enough racks, and they're doing their best to make it work. But it would be a lot better if they had more space, less tea on the racks and whatnot. So Wu takes us into the small factory, and we meet his auntie. His auntie is the resident tea maker, which is really cool because she's been doing this for a really long time, and she just is a character. She's telling us all these stories about how wild and crazy the tea production in this region is, where, you know, she knows people that make wild tea. This comes up. And she's like, I know that farmer. I know that village. They can't make wild tea. They don't have wild tea trees. And yet they make, 100 tons of wild tea a year. And this is when we're talking about tons and tons of tea. Wu and his auntie make huge amounts of tea. And so she's talking about all the different wild tea places. And she's like, oh, if you want wild tea, though, I know where it comes from. So I can make you wild tea and it'll be really cheap. And instantly I'm just like, okay, like you're ragging on another person's wild tea. And then you say that you can make a lot of wild tea. And eventually we ask, oh, can you press cakes? And she's like, yeah, we can press cakes. And so we walk over to their warehouse where they're kind of storing a bunch of stuff. And she's showing us examples of the tea cakes they've pressed. We're looking for, maybe 100-gram cakes, 200-gram cakes. But all they have are those massive Fuding 350-gram cakes. And so we look at one. It says wild white peony, wild king peony on it. And we're like, wow, that seems like a really nice quality tea. And so we're asking about, the origin of it and the price of it, and it's super cheap. And we're just wondering, like, why is this wild peony king so cheap? And she's like, it's actually not wild white tea. It's actually not king peony grade either. That's just some tea we pressed. I'm showing you the example of the cake we pressed. That's just a label that a vendor wanted me to put on it. And just the way she's telling us this, it's like the same way the farmers are saying we can make it green, we can make it brown, buy the brown stuff, it'll sell for more. She's like, here's a tea cake you can make, and I can just put on whatever wrapper you want it to say. If you wanted to say, wild astro tea from outer space, sure. And so this is, for me, what's really settling into my mind. This is what Guangyang is like. It's this wild west of tea production where everyone's kind of exaggerating their teas. There's not a lot of people checking in on this stuff. There's not a lot of inspections going on. In Panxi, I would see police officers coming, probably not police officers, but people in uniforms coming to inspect the fields, coming to check if anyone was spraying. Here in Guangyang, I'm sure that's not happening so much. I didn't see a single evidence of anything like that. But we did kind of have a successful tea trip into Guangyang because we initially found the Brown Shoumei out in the Diantou wholesale market. We discovered it for the very first time. And so we learned about it and its difference between green Shoumei from Cho. We learned that the Brown Shoumei is a lesser quality. It's made in an inferior way by heaping more tea on the drying racks. And we learned that it's easier to make. And the farmers are saying, buy it, you can sell it as aged tea. We're trying to figure out where it comes from. We get over to Guangyang, and Cho or Wu is making a huge amount of it, like hundreds and hundreds of tons. And it's all just this Brown Shoumei. Of course, he said they can make it green if we want it green, but they usually by default just make the brown stuff. And then they're pressing it into cakes, and on the cakes they're writing wild Bai Mudan. They're writing whatever they want on the tea cakes, and then these are the tea cakes that are getting just shipped off anywhere. And so, with this, I just really want to bring up the idea again that unless you really know where your tea is coming from, unless you've really followed it from the bush, unless you completely trust your producers, which, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't even totally trust Cho when he told me that his green Shoumei was better. It took many years of experience for me to realize that, yeah, he probably has a point. This brown Shoumei probably doesn't age as well as the green Shoumei does. And so, in my mind, we're kind of facing this really dangerous part of the development of white tea's era where a lot of the Shoumei that's being made now is made brown. It's not made to be aged. And so there's a very small percentage of tea now that's suitable for aging as far as the Shoumei goes, which is very scary in my opinion. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get as much of this green Shoumei. We're trying to press it into cakes and kind of store it for the long haul. So with that, I'm going to bring the discussion of the Fuding tea-producing regions to a close. We went to Taimushan, the mythic birthplace. We went to Panxi and Bailing, the two kind of like modern poster childs now. We went to Diantou, where that's the wholesale market. And then we finally just got out to Guangyang, where they're making a huge majority of the tea that's on the market, and a lot of it is not quite to the Panxi standards, but Wu still has a special place in our heart, and we try and buy some of this brown Shoumei, mainly for educational purposes, to kind of give people the experience between green Shoumei and brown Shoumei and all that jazz. So anyways, this is Derek from One River Tea. Thanks for catching this episode of Tea Soup. And until next time, brew happy.